They say you should never ask a woman her age, but I'm thinking Mother Earth is needing more than just Avon to help her with her signs of aging. It's a crucial question pertaining to the origins controversy. What is the age of the Earth, and how could we know? We dive into that question in this special edition of Genesis Week. And welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the origins controversy, made possible by the supporters of CORE Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education. Excellence in pirate broadcasting, commandeering the airwaves of Miracle Channel when they weren't looking, and broadcasting to you from one of Ben Laden's 4Ks. The anti-creationists will never find us here as we continue to bring the information they don't want you to see or hear. And we'll give glory to the Creator while doing it. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, just punch in Wazooloo.com or GenesisWeek.com and you will find us. I'm your host, Juby. The age of the Earth is a crucial subject and a question that many people have, and rightly so. The models of biblical creation and the theory of evolution hold to vastly different ages of the Earth, and indeed the age of the Earth will determine whether either model stands or falls. So let us not wade into this subject lightly, because eternity is indeed on the line. First of all, let's contrast the two models. Evolution demands an Earth many hundreds of millions of years old because evolution is alleged to operate at an exceedingly slow rate. The biblical account of creation, on the other hand, indicates an Earth that is quite young, on the order of some 6,000 years old. Now, this is based on the account of creation in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, but also from other texts in the Bible, such as the genealogies of Matthew and Luke in the New Testament, which give us the genealogies from Christ right through to Adam and Eve, who were created during Creation Week. Now, some might contend that the days of creation in Genesis are not literal days, but for a variety of reasons, we know that they are. For example, in his book, The Young Age of the Earth, Dr. John Morris details the Hebrew word for day, which is yom, and its meaning in the Genesis account. Now, if we look elsewhere in the scriptures, we see that every time the word day is used, with morning and evening, it was always a literal day. Whenever it was used with light and darkness, it was always a literal day. Whenever it is used with a number, like the first day, second day, third day, etc., it was always a literal day. So when we take a look at the Genesis accounts, each day of creation was listed with morning and evening, light and darkness, and a number. It's as if God looked ahead, knew the questions that we would have today regarding the age of the Earth, and emphasized to us that each creation day was a literal day. Now, what about 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8? You know, where it says a day to the Lord is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years to the Lord is like a day. Maybe those days of creation weren't literal days, but figurative, and were really 1,000 years each. Well, if that were the case, you'd have a math problem, because Adam was created day 6, lived through day 7, but died at 930 years of age. Still others suggest that there is a gap of time in Genesis chapter 1 between verses 1 and 2. But as Dr. Jonathan Sarfati pointed out in his book, Refuting Evolution, the Hebrew grammar does not allow a large time gap. Verse 1 is a vav consecutive, verse 2 is a vav conjunctive, verse 3 is a vav consecutive. So, taking the grammar into account, we could rewrite the English translation with the second verse in brackets, like this. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Verse 2 actually connects verse 1 and 3. So there is no long time gap in there. So, making use of the genealogies in the New Testament, and the ages of people throughout the scriptures, we get a ballpark on the age of the earth, according to the Bible, roughly 6,000 years or so. Now, when people learn what the Bible says about the age of the earth, generally they get all sorts of questions racing through their mind. Questions like, but what about the dinosaurs? After all, we're told that the dinosaurs are many millions of years old. Well, in this program, we critically examine scientific claims, so let's start asking some questions. How do we know the dinosaurs are millions of years old? I mean, they don't come with some stamp on them with a date. Can we ascertain the age of the Earth? The idea of an old Earth, millions, perhaps billions of years, was first concocted not by geologists, but by a lawyer, Sir Charles Lyell, trying to explain away the evidence left behind by Noah's flood. I go into detail on this matter in my complete creation video series, so for the sake of time, I won't get into it today. However, Lyell went around the world looking for evidence to back up his new historical sketch of the Earth. His idea was called uniformitarianism, the idea that only slow, present-day processes carved and shaped the Earth. Now, this was a subtle lawyer's tactic. Not at all scientific, because he ruled out the possibility of a past global flood without consideration. He traveled around the globe looking for evidence for long and slow geologic processes, such as the erosion of the Niagara Falls Gorge. Now, he saw the gorge, pulled an estimate out of a hat, and suggested that the gorge was eroding at a mere 1 foot per year. He claimed that the gorge is 30,000 feet long, therefore the gorge must be 30,000 years old, right? Not so fast. Turns out he just made up that erosion rate. The actual erosion rate was considerably higher, 5 to 7 feet per year. The point I wish to make here, though, is Lyell's uniformitarian ideas have permeated the scientific community, and many evolutionary thinkers believe such rates actually do show the Earth is old. As you can see, however, varying rates gives a varying age of the Earth. So we must take all of this with a grain of salt. With that in mind, is there any way that we can at least get an idea of the age of the Earth? Oh yes. For example, the human population. In October of 2011, the human population hit an estimated 7 billion people. Now, that sounds like a lot of people, but if you took 7 billion people, gave them each 1 meter square to stand in, the entire population of planet Earth would fit in a square measuring a mere 84 kilometers in breadth and width. Now, according to the biblical account, the human population suffered a massive bottleneck about 4,500 years ago at the time of Noah's flood, when all but 8 people were wiped off the face of the earth. Now, if that is true, then the population growth has been an average of 0.46%, a figure that is conservative when compared to the 2009 CIA World Factbook estimate of 1.092%. However, according to the evolutionary dogma, the human population has been around at least 200,000 years. So if we use our conservative growth rate of 0.46%, starting with a population of one couple 200,000 years ago, the present population would have Earth bursting at the seams with 4.138 times 10 to the power of 398 people. That's 4 followed by 398 zeros. I cover this subject in more detail in my Crevo Rant number 71, Earth Population and Time. But for the moment, I will simply point out the astonishing contrast between the creation and evolution models and reality. In this case, creation is clearly the faith that better fits the facts. But the human race also provides another clock by which we can contrast the models from a genetic perspective. Dr. Jonathan Sanford, co-inventor of the gene gun, was a former evolutionist who, because of his own research in genetics, came to the conclusion that evolution was incorrect and that creation in young Earth was correct. Why? Well, as he documents in his book, Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome, we humans are suffering a measurable rate of genetic decline. Our DNA is wearing out and being overcome by errors over time. The errors are accumulating so fast that the human race cannot be 200,000 years old. In fact, the deterioration rate is so fast that scientific papers have been inspired with titles like The High Spontaneous Mutation Rate. Is it a health risk? Contamination of the genome by very slightly deleterious mutations. Why have we not died 100 times over? Crow's article suggested that the human DNA was deteriorating by as much as 1 to 2% per generation. Brock Lee, author of the Comparative Views on Origins, put together a chart showing the deterioration of the genome at 1 and 2% and how many generations before catastrophic DNA failure. Clearly, the best you can get, based on the more conservative figures, is perhaps a few hundred generations. At an average of 30 years per generation, that's still only a few thousand years, a far, far cry from the hundreds of thousands of years of alleged human ancestry. Forget about our hominid ancestors. We also know that Earth's electromagnetic field is weakening. We need this field for life on Earth. Now, while the weakening field is a concern, it's a bigger concern when you start going back in time and experiencing a stronger field. Dr. Thomas Barnes pointed out the Earth's electromagnetic field is weakening at a half-life of about 1,400 years. In other words, 1,400 years ago it was twice as strong as it is now. 2,800 years ago it was 4 times as strong. 4,200 years ago it was 8 times as strong, etc. Going back a mere 25,000 years ago, a drop in the bucket of the evolutionary timescale, the Earth's magnetic field would have approached that of a magnetic star, and life on Earth would be impossible. Again, creation is the faith that seems to fit facts far better than the evolutionary faith. From a geological perspective, we have a massive erosion problem for deep time. The mountains are being eroded at known rates, which are surprisingly high. Some 27.5 billion tons of rock per year. There's about 383 quadrillion tons of continental crust above sea level. So simply dividing the known erosion rate into the known volume of continental crust, we can calculate that the continents would be eroded flat in a mere 14 million years. Yet, according to mountain experts Ollier and Payne, all the mountains around the world rose up at the same time, some 55 to 80 million years ago. We got a problem here. We have lots of large, sharp, and uneroded mountains all over planet Earth, indicating those mountains are very young. Some of the most profound evidence comes from the fossil record itself of what sure appear to be human and dinosaur footprints together. Dr. Louis Jacobs was the former president of the Society for Vertebrate Paleontology, the Society of Dinosaur Diggers. He stated in his book, Quest for the African Dinosaurs, the co-occurrence of men and dinosaurs would dispel an Earth with vast antiquity. The entire history of creation, including the Day of Rest, could be accommodated in the 7 biblical days of the Genesis myth. Evolution would be vanquished. In other words, if men and dinosaurs lived together, it would mean 3 things. The Earth was young, on the order of 6,000 years old. The biblical account of creation would be correct. Evolution would be incorrect. Now, he said it, not me. I'm just agreeing with him. Well, in my museum, I have numerous fossil human footprints found among, sometimes inside, fossil dinosaur tracks. And in one case, a dinosaur track that stepped upon a human track. I also show numerous human artifacts and fossils found in rock layers dated by the evolutionists as older than the dinosaurs. I go into detail on the fossil human footprints in other episodes of Genesis Week, but for the moment the implications are clear. This means the Earth is 6,000 years old, creation is the faith that fits the facts, and evolution is the faith that the facts have failed. So what about all those dating methods for rocks? I answered this question in my Crevo Rant number 100.
Hey everyone, I got a written request in from Isaac in Indiana who wrote in, "Hey Ian, can you please do a rant on dating methods?" Sure, Isaac, I'm glad to help you out there. As you know, I'm personally still a Christian guy looking for a young Christian lady. My favorite dating method is ChristianCafe.com, the online Christian dating site. Go there, you can fill out a profile, you can let the computer do a match for you, or you can do your own searches, and maybe write the lady a letter saying, "Hey, how about you and I do Tim Hortons, eh?" And you could... What do you mean you don't think that's what he's talking about? Isaac, what? He wants to date a rock? I don't think I can help him much. Oh, you mean like get an age of a rock? Like radio dating methods. Oh, yeah, I can help you out with that too, Isaac. Isaac is referring to radio dating methods. Now, this is a really complicated subject, so you're going to want to put on your thinking cap. Now, for you conspiracy theorists out there, a good quality thinking cap should fit comfortably underneath your tinfoil hat. However, if I may make a suggestion, not only does it guard against EMF, EMP, and unwanted government mind-reading technologies, it also doubles as a hard hat. Radio dating methods are based on radioactive decay. For example, uranium is a radioactive element. It's so heavy it's actually a little out of balance. So every once in a while it throws a particle off. This is called radiation. Now, uranium-238, for example, then turns into thorium-234. Thorium is the daughter element. But thorium is also heavy and unstable, so eventually it throws off a particle and turns into protactinium. Protactinium is also unstable, throws a particle off, and turns into another form of uranium, which then turns into another form of thorium, etc., etc. Eventually, all of this breaks down into lead, which is a stable element and doesn't turn into anything else. We can measure in a lab how long it takes for each of these breakdowns to occur. So, theoretically, we can take a look at a rock, examine the ratio of parent to daughter radioactive elements, and get a rough time scale and even be able to guess as to how old that rock is. But these radio dating methods invariably give ages of millions to billions of years. The Bible says the Earth is only 6,000 years old. So do these radio dating methods contradict the biblical account of creation and the age of the Earth? In short, no. Take, for example, the Uinkaret lava flows which flowed into Grand Canyon. These rocks were dated using a battery of radio dating tests. 6 different potassium argon tests were run, getting ages of between 10,000 years old to 117 million years old. 5 rubidium strontium tests said the rocks were actually 1.27 billion years old to 1.39 billion years old. The lead dating method said the rocks were in fact 2.6 billion years old. Rubidium strontium isochron method said that no, the rocks were actually 1.34 billion years old. Rubidium strontium isochron is supposed to be the holy grail of radio dating methods, not only to ascertain the age of a rock, but actually able to give us an indication of how accurate the age is, or if the rock has been contaminated. So which age is the correct age? We have a spread of ages different by a factor of 260,000. Well, rubidium strontium isochron is supposed to be the most accurate of the methods, so let's go with that age. Oh, did I mention that there's Indian artifacts in the lava flows, therefore we know the lava is actually 800 to 1,000 years old? Oops. This is certainly not an isolated case. A typical old Earth geologist will reply with contamination. Well, obviously we have the wrong answer, therefore the sample must have been contaminated. Wait a minute, that's shooting yourself in the foot. The only reason you are claiming contamination is because we found out the actual age of the rock based on archaeology after the fact. How about all those rock layers that we can't verify the age of, that you've assigned an age of millions, perhaps billions of years to? How can we trust those ages? The bottom line is, we can't. In fact, multiple modern lava flows have been dated using radio dating methods, and invariably they came back with ages of millions to billions of years. Obviously something is horribly, horribly wrong. And by claiming contamination after the fact, you just demonstrated how quickly and easily you are willing to reject your own dates based on the scientific methods of radio dating, which give rock-solid ages. Wait a minute. Are the dating methods reliable or not? Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. In fact, geologists really do pick and choose whatever dates they want. Don't believe me? Just examine for yourself the radio dating history of the famous skull 1470. I covered this in part 21 of Complete Creation. Or check out the notorious dating of the famous Mars rock ALH 84001. When geologist Dr. Steve Austin from the Institute for Creation Research took samples of the lava dome that formed in Mount St. Helens in 1986, he had them radio dated using the potassium argon dating method. He got ages of 340,000 to 2.8 million years old on rocks that were 10 years old. Well, Hanky and the folks at the No Answers in Genesis website just couldn't contain themselves, and they wrote, oh, I love this. Considering that the half-life of potassium-40 is fairly long, 1,250 million years, the potassium argon method cannot be used to date samples that are much younger than 6,000 years old. A few thousand years are not enough time for argon-40 to accumulate in a sample at high enough concentrations to be detected and quantified. Did these guys stop to think before they wrote? Did they not realize that they just admitted, in print, that if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, that their radio dating methods will give a wrong, incorrect age of millions, perhaps billions of years? Did they not realize that they just handed over the entire debate on a silver platter to a guy wearing a pot on his head? Oh, they really shot themselves in the foot this time. Plus, their claim gets more and more preposterous when you examine it. They said there was not enough time for argon to collect. Well, actually, that wasn't the problem. That's like saying this glass of water actually only has 1 drop of water in it. But the amount is so small that our scientific equipment, which is insanely expensive, can't read that small an amount. That's why it shows the glass falsely as being full when in fact it only has 1 drop. What school did these guys go to? If your scientific equipment can't read that small an amount, it's going to read an amount of 0, not a full glass. If the potassium-argon method really worked, then it should show an age of 0 for the Mount St. Helens rocks, not many, many, many millions of years old. You've got it backwards, guys. Lastly, Henke just admitted in print one of the subtle assumptions you never hear about in radiometric dating, the assumption that the rock is millions of years old. Another subject you never hear brought up with radio dating is calibration. When a scientific method is developed, it is calibrated using known benchmarks. Well, when radio dating was invented, it was calibrated using the ages assigned to the rocks by evolutionary theory. Ages that were arbitrarily assigned. For example, in 1905, we knew that the dinosaurs were 8 million years old. In 1927, we knew that the dinosaurs were 30 million years old. In 1941, we knew that the dinosaurs were 150 million years old. Just as the ages of the dinosaurs and the rock layers that are in have changed over the years, so have the ages of the radio dating methods used to date those rocks. It's changed right along with our knowledge and what we know about the age of the rocks. If the radio date does not line up with the evolutionary assumptions, the radio date is assumed to be incorrect and it is thrown in the garbage. Radio dates are cherry-picked. It's just part of the system. In fact, in what has to be the ultimate irony, we can calibrate the radio dating methods. The Uinkaret lava flows, the Mount St. Helens lavas, the Hawaiian lava flows, all of these lava flows can be used to calibrate radio dating methods. Yet, instead of accepting the obvious conclusion that a radio date of 1.3 billion years old really means the rock is only 1,000 years old, the radio dates are rejected out of hand with lame excuses. Why? Because we need millions and millions and millions of years for evolutionary theory to work. In fact, in my debate with Dr. David Kowerner from Northern Arizona State University, I had challenged him and offered to drive all the way down to Arizona so that he and I could take a sample of the Uinkaret lava flows and put it through any radio dating test he wanted in order to calibrate and test the system. He declined. Could it be because he already knows that any radio dating method he uses is already going to produce an age which is incorrect by millions or billions of years? Look, you can call radio dating methods anything you want, as long as you don't use words, like reliable, trustworthy, scientific, or correct. I'm going to leave carbon-14 for rant number 101, because that is a fun subject all on its own that pertains to what we talked about today. Instead of looking to the age of the rocks, perhaps we should be looking to the Rock of Ages, the Lord Jesus Christ, who created these rocks and created you and me. He said that if we didn't cry out in praise, the rocks themselves would cry out in praise. I think the rocks themselves have already cried out, and people didn't listen. Why don't you cry out to the Creator of all things today? Mail for me?
Lowell from Michigan wrote in probably the most common question I get during Q&A, and it pertains to the age of the Earth. Is carbon dating accurate? Thanks for writing in, Lowell. The correct answer is yes and no. There are assumptions that vary carbon-14 dates, and thus they can only be trusted so much. However, in the end, carbon-14 will probably wind up being the creationist's friend. Here's why. Carbon-14 works on once-living material. Nitrogen-14 in the upper atmosphere goes through a series of interactions with ultraviolet light from the sun, which turns it into carbon-14, a radioactive form of carbon. This mixes with oxygen to become carbon dioxide, which the plants eat, animals eat the plants, we eat the plants and the animals, so everything that's living takes in this radioactive form of carbon. until you die. Now, obviously, when you die, you stop taking in carbon. But because this form of carbon is radioactive, it breaks down radioactively over time. After 100,000 years, all of the carbon-14 will have broken down into nitrogen. There will be 0 carbon-14. So, obviously, you cannot get a date any higher than 100,000 years using the carbon-14 dating method. In fact, after 50,000 years, it's considered generally to be pretty unreliable. The bottom line is, anything older than 100,000 years old will have 0 carbon-14 in it. Now comes the dilemma. Let's start with the dinosaurs, alleged to be 100 million years old. Creationary researchers have discovered that there is loads of carbon-14 in dinosaur bones and in wood fragments found in the rock containing the dinosaurs. Now, these samples almost always come back with carbon-14 ages of between 5,000 and 50,000 years old. So, which age is correct? 5,000 years old, 50,000 years old, or 100 million years old? In fact, if we take a sample of any biomatter from anywhere in the geologic column, it almost always comes back with lots of carbon-14, usually giving a C14 age of between 5,000 and 50,000 years old. Samples with carbon-14 have been taken from coal seams, supposedly 300 million years old, natural gas wells, alleged to be 300 million years old, crude oil wells, supposedly 300 million years old, carbon dioxide wells, supposed to be 500 million years old, mammoth bones, wood fragments scattered throughout the geologic column, and even diamonds, which are supposed to be 1 to 3 billion years old. They all contain lots of carbon-14. The implications are obvious. We find young carbon-14 samples throughout the geologic column, which are supposed to be many hundreds of millions of years old. This shows that the hundreds of millions of years is actually science fiction. The Earth and the geologic column are young, on the order of thousands of years. Well, that's it for this week's show. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, you can share this program with your friends on TwitFace+ using the convenient share button down below. You can send in comments and questions through a variety of channels. You can email us at comments@genesisweek.com, or you can also send us a tweet at GenesisWeek, or head to genesisweek.com, which is our YouTube channel, and leave a comment under the appropriate show. I'm your host, Ian Juby, reminding you of the words of our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me." See you next week as we pursue the truth.
We need your support to help keep this program on the air. You can help by making a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, K2K2P4. You can also sign up for Ian's newsletter detailing current research and news items at ianjuby.org.